Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, who should be joining us. He's en route to Florida right now, but we do have a very huge panel today to discuss something very important, and that's the United States debt downgraded to AA plus from AAA. So first of all, I'm going to bring in, and I'm always going to surprise him, the person who saved my bacon on LinkedIn just a minute ago, a producer that you've seen over and over again on the Pod TV shows, Mark Lee. I know, Mark, you weren't expecting to get on, but you saved my bacon because I was going, the LinkedIn, which we have a lot of viewers on, was scheduled for August 14th. And I was
August 14th, yeah.
I don't remember doing that, but, sometimes they do that. But we do have some people from a very famous show that's getting really good ratings on the Pod TV network. We're going to be bringing the person who's behind all this, behind the scenes, and also in front of the camera from Canada, Sasha Starr, who heads up Modern Investing, and he can give us some insights on the downgrading of American debt. But he also has a cohort in crime from Canada, so we're going to be half Canadians, half Americans here. A dentist who's also the Monday Morning Millionaire himself, Milan Sobranic. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
I guess we'll start with our friends from Canada, because in America, we go to sleep when bad things happen. So the debt gets downgraded from AAA to AA plus. And frankly, we don't care. We'll go watch Taylor Swift. We'll go watch Barbie movies. We're going to see the NFL come back. And frankly, we go back to sleep. So I'll start with you, Sasha. Is that something that we should be concerned about? Or like the traditional Americans who don't watch this show, that are economic illiterate, which are hundreds of millions, according to my count, Sasha, they just go back to sleep. They don't care. So what's your thoughts about the downgrading of American debt to AA plus?
It's very interesting that I was looking at different sources and commentaries, and some people, like, for example, Warren Buffett, they absolutely ignore the downgrade and basically they're of opinion that it's non-event. In any case, yet there are some other voices that are concerned with the downgrade because essentially the debt is getting bigger and bigger, and as a percentage of GDP is also getting bigger. And it's kind of uncharted waters in a way, because although US is the only country that can print US dollars, nobody else can. So this is to defend debt and all the consequences of that. But still, there might be some proportions that US debt is getting a little bit ahead of itself. It's getting too large to contemplate, and especially with high interest rates, there is a great expenses to maintain that debt. So it's I don't think that I'm qualified really to say one way or another what to do about this, and what's really estimation of the debt and the consequences and so on. Maybe David Walker will address that.
Well, David is here, and we also have a slide presentation. I know you're on the road, David, but this to me is a pretty important topic. The U.S. debt is downgraded, and Americans, we ignore it. We go watch Barbie, we go watch the NFL, we watch Taylor Swift. We just don't care. What are your thoughts about this? We can't hear you.
Did you want me to comment on it?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Nick, did you want me to? Yeah. Okay. Well, we're driving on I-95, and I apologize if it breaks up a little bit. But thanks for showing the opinion piece that appeared today in Real Clear Politics. Look, here's the bottom line. For years, the Office of Management and Budget, the Congressional Budget Office, the General Government Accountability Office, and the Federal Reserve have said that the U.S. is on an improved and unsustainable fiscal path. Debt to GDP is escalating dramatically. When you count the debt that we owe Social Security and Medicare, we've already broken all-time records. And it's not a matter of where we are, it's where we're headed. We're headed to over 180% of GDP within the next 30 years if we do nothing, which is third world nation status. We've been abusing our position as the leading reserve currency in the world, and we need to do something about it. Now, recently we raised our debt ceiling, and there was some reduction in the projected deficit that was accomplished as a result of that, but very, very modest. So basically what I said in the op-ed, it's time to recognize reality. We need two things. We need a constitutional amendment that will limit the growth in spending and how much debt as percentage of the economy we can take on. And we need a statutory commission where Congress and the president buy in up front for the need to put everything on the table for a comprehensive fiscal reform package. That means discretionary spending, mandatory spending, and revenues that engages the American public with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, makes recommendations that will be guaranteed a vote in Congress. The people are way ahead of the politicians. The politicians are the lag indicators, and we have to recognize that and have mechanisms that A, will stand the test of time and set the table for a tough vote that otherwise members of Congress wouldn't likely make. Over.
Hey, Dave, along those same lines, this is Mark over here. There has been a movement around the country, a big movement around buy local. I don't care whether that's your local community that might be an ethnic community or a local community that is just a folks that are in a certain neighborhood or along those lines. But is that something that could help with the U.S. debt? And is that something that could even help us raise the going back up to the level that we were at and everything in that space? Because I know that was a movement. I had a friend that was involved in California in that movement. I have friends that have definitely been involved in certain minority communities in that movement and everything. But is that something that we should be thinking about? And is that something that your whole notion of the fiscal responsibility and the constitutional element will play into? Because I do know that was a very popular movement, I would argue, for the last 10 years.
Well, I only got part of that, but here's the deal. Probably the best example of a constitutional amendment that works, and so far has stood the test of time, is the Swiss debt brake, which was adopted with 85% approval of Swiss voters in the early 2000s. And the result of that is significantly constrained spending growth. It has resulted in significant increase in economic growth, a significant increase in their ranking of GDP per capita, a strengthening of the Swiss franc, and a number of other things that obviously are very, very positive. Plus, they have the number one debt rating of any major industrialized nation. So, that's an example. Another example is, setting a credit card limit that can only be breached with a formal declaration of war or certain very, very limited circumstances for a temporary period of time, and then setting a target of a lower debt to GDP from where we are right now. And we would want to achieve, let's say, those type of approaches make the most sense because they focus on what really matters. That is, how much debt do you have as a percentage of the economy? What's the debt burden? The other thing you have to worry about is how much is interest as a percentage of your budget. It's the fastest growing expense. It's soon going to pass national defense. And what do we get for interest? Nothing.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a big problem. And we want to hear from our friend down under in Australia if he's not trading U.S. Bonds right now.
That's exactly what I'm trading.
That's what I figured you were doing, Shaquille, because you were
interest rate derivatives are my specialty, and the shock to the system was absolutely fantastic for me as the 10-year notes futures contracts went from 100 and just shy of 118 to just shy of 111. But look, I will just say a couple of things. David M. Walker, I'm glad that you're in the United States because if you're in that seat in the car here in Australia, then you're driving and talking at the same time, which would be a bit of a concern. But what I will just say is I actually, again, I'm not American, so I don't have as much skin in the game, although I trade US positions and I'm I obviously have a great affection for the United States.
Shaquille, I'm sorry. David is a passenger in the car. He's not
Yeah,
driving.
he's a passenger.
I know, Sash. That's
what he said.
I am quite. I'm not quite as unhappy about the debt downgrade. A couple of reasons. One, you've been debt downgraded before, so America will bounce back from it. But two, maybe that's what's required for US politicians and the US government to say, actually, yeah, this could be a problem. And to the point that you made, David, about rising interest rates, the historical average is 5%. 5% interest on a $30 trillion debt is about $1.5 trillion. So, hey, that's a massive part of the US budget. That's a massive amount of the money that the US government actually makes. What do they make now? About $5 trillion. So, look, the economy will probably continue to increase, especially with inflation, but maybe this will be the impetus for government people to actually take this issue seriously and to start addressing it. And more to the point, when you have a look at the Middle East, which the majority of which have their currencies pegged to the US dollar, they might sit there and say, we don't really like our purchasing power being eroded by the spending not of our own country, our own governments, but of a foreign government. And hence you're seeing a weakening of the US dollar as a potential world reserve currency. You're seeing the BRICS nations become more popular, more powerful and trade amongst themselves. You're seeing the fact that 30% of the world is currently under sanction. Of course, they're going to start trading with each other. So that may be the impetus for the United States to rebuild and solidify its relationships with overseas nations and be a little bit more fiscally responsible. And David M. Walker, I really love your comments about they need to target debt to GDP. It's not just about debt as an absolute figure, but the debt to GDP and the repayability of that debt in comparison to the GDP.
Yeah, along those same lines, and this is a question actually for Kim and everything, but I'm sure Dave will have some thoughts about this. But you just said that you wanted a limitation on credit cards, and I don't have any credit cards, got some debit cards, but no credit cards. But I'm going along those same lines, and I'm thinking to myself, how is that going to fly with the like I said, I've got nephews that are 14 and 15, and Kim, I know you've got a son that is in his 20s, if I remember correctly, and a lot of those people are living off of their credit, and if you tell them that they're going to have to live off of no credits or credit cards, that's going to be a serious issue with that voting bloc. So how are we going to win them over?
This is a call. We need a call to action, and we need a way forward. What I tried to do in the opinion piece is to give two specific concrete examples of what we need to do to solve the problem. Everybody knows we have a problem. The question is, what are we going to do to solve it? And that's going to take a different kind of process. If one Congress can't find the next Congress, statutory approaches are the debt ceiling is a bad joke. The only thing that will set the test of time is the Constitutional Amendment. And that's what I'm advocating for, along with this statutory commission, which learns the lessons from our past Simpson-Bowles Commission in 2010. So the other thing is, we have the largest reserve currency, 60%. But if we don't get our act, we lose market share. We're not going to lose reserve currency status, but we're going to lose significant market share. We're already seeing factors in the world where others are lining up against the dollar as the primary reserve currency and want to go to alternative currency or a basket of currencies. I apologize. I'm going to need to get off because I'm only hearing about every third word. I hope you can hear more of mine. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Well, thanks for joining us, David.
Appreciate you, David.
All right. But the thing is, it doesn't negate the issue, which is the U.S. debt downgrading is a very serious issue. It looks like that. And Milan, we want to hear.
I do agree, and then it replays fine. So, but the question I want to raise is who does to whom's benefit does this go to? Does this go back in their pockets because they're able to raise the interest rates on the loans and the money goes back into whoever the investors are or the government who's invested in this? I I mean, who benefits from something like this, Nick?
Well, I was going to.
Seems how David's not here to answer.
The credit ratings are not done
I think
as a
Shaquille
benefit
does.
or a cost to the organisation that's issuing these ratings. Theoretically, and
Yeah,
I
I understand that, but who act? I understand that, but somebody benefits from this. Who, Nick?
So theoretically, although we had this issue in 2008,
Anyone?
theoretically,
It would be nice to know, because why else do it?
Theoretically, these agencies are issuing these ratings.
They're a bunch of
So people like
bumbling
myself,
idiots,
investors in US
because
debt.
the mistakes all the time.
So people like myself and investors in US debt are going to want to see an interest rate which is commensurate with the perceived risk. And so, of course, we benefit from a higher interest rate, but it's also worth noting that there's a lot of people that are on fixed incomes that actually benefit from a higher interest rate, who during the 2008 period, 2007, 8, 9 period, were hurt by the fact that interest rates dropped so significantly. So I don't think it's just a matter of looking at who's going to benefit and saying that they're the cause of it. People benefit and lose based on interest rates being high or interest rates being low. I don't think it's as simple as that.
Hey, Shaquille, one of the things that was mentioned was the whole notion of...
Milan was trying to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Milan.
Were you going to give me a chance
You know,
Yeah,
I have to wonder. The government is doing the look. If you ask me.
Well,
So let's give the government an F. But they keep making this better. Why haven't they improved?
can I
Somebody's benefiting from it. There's money being pushed into
can I say a few
somebody's
words here?
pocket.
That'll connect
That's what
everything?
I'd like to know what's happening.
Confucius said, study the past if you would define the future. The 15th century belonged to Portugal. The 16th century belonged to Spain. The 17th century belonged to the Netherlands. The 18th century belonged to France. The 19th century belonged to Britain. The 20th century belonged to the United States. And is that about to end? Every century was owned by a different power, and the United States has been in power for the 20th century. Based on history, is that about to end? I don't know the answer to that. Likely it will. We don't know when. Now, when you take a look at the longest period of market decline that we have ever had, happened during 1929, during that depression, 1929. And what happened then, the margin requirements were 10%. Margin requirements today are about 50%. You have to have 50% to borrow 50% from your broker. In 1929, they were 10%. The margin requirements are so close to zero, and people were using that borrowing power to speculate. And that's when the economy fell apart. But it lasted 4 years, not 40, 4 years. 40, yeah, in Japan, it's been over 20 years, but let's not go there. That's a complicated issue. But it lasted 4 years. So is it likely to happen again? Possible, but unlikely. So, you take a look at study the past if you would define the future. Every century belonged to a different power, and the American power could be ending anytime now. But when you take a look at the longest period of market decline, 4 years, when margin requirements were 10%. So the chances are that we're going to be okay. And like Sasha said, I don't have the answer.
Milan, I don't think it's just margin requirements. I think that Milton Friedman made a very good point when he said that this catastrophe was caused by the Fed and was solely the responsibility of the Fed for not increasing the monetary supply when it was necessary. Now what we've seen is a very aggressive oversupply in the monetary system, which the Fed is going to have to reduce over time. So my fear is that we're going to not make the mistakes of the past. The Fed's not going to make the same mistakes that it made 100 years ago, they're going to make a whole new set of mistakes that are going to hurt the world's economy in a whole new, different way that we've experienced before. And a lot of that's going to do with the oversupply and the overexpansion of the monetary supply.
Hey, Milan and Shaquille, and I alluded to it with David and everything. There is a very powerful lobby out there, and it is a incredibly powerful lobby. And if you're talking about credit card limits and you're talking about other things that make sense in the sense of trying to control our spending along those lines, I don't know that the banking establishment is going to go for that, because that is a very powerful lobby. So how are we going to get past that very powerful lobby? I would put them up there almost with the pharmaceuticals and some of the other lobbies that are out there that are very powerful in that space. And they do have a lot of control. And I'm sure that if you talk about credit card limits, they're going to be sitting there going like, what, and lose our customer base? Have you lost your mind?
Well, I think if you go to South Dakota or Delaware, you may find that they're enthusiastic about credit card debt, but I'll certainly say to you that I don't think that consumer debt levels in and of themselves are a concern to the national credit rating of the country, because that has to do with government debt. Certainly, there's a potential flow-on effect to the banks, which could put strain on the financial system and the economic system of the United States. But I'm not overly concerned about consumer debt levels in and of itself from a national perspective, but I do think it's a concern from a banking perspective about how the banks are going to facilitate the funding of these debt levels, where they're going to get that funding from, and how they're going to remain solvent in the event of mass default. One good thing about credit cards, though, is that your theoretical repayments are relatively low, and because there's no set payment payout date like there is with a home mortgage, these debts can sort of sit there forever.
Canada has 5, maybe 6 banks, none of which ever failed. And if you had been invested in any of those banks for the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you would have done very well indeed. And that's likely to continue. Now, I know that American bank failures are an everyday event, and many of them are a ma and pa operation where they just have 1 or 2 branches. But the Canadian banks are doing very well indeed, and will continue to do well.
I mean, that comes down to the credit cards. I mean, one of the biggest credit cards is Chase Bank, because Chase Bank backs a lot of those credit cards. And I did hear David earlier say that is something that fiscal constitutional amendment that he wants to put would put a limit on what people's credit cards were. That's what he said before he left and everything.
All of us here remember when only the father was working at a job and the mother stayed at home and looked after the children and did the household chores. So all of us here remember that that's what the situation was.
Milan, I'm in my 30s, my friend. Come on now.
Sorry, say again?
I'm in my 30s. Come on now. I don't remember these days. I've read about them, though.
Oh, okay, so the rest of us, let's say, those of us who are older, so remember that only the father used to work. Now, in order to be able to afford a house, or in order to be able to afford the lifestyle that we have, both parents are working. And the third thing also is they have credit card debt, which they never used to have. Credit cards only came into being in the late 60s. Prior to that, people didn't have a credit card. So now both parents are working, and they have credit card debt to allow them to own their home. Otherwise, they couldn't afford it, to allow them to buy groceries. So that's not going to change. So,
I'm a little bit dissatisfied with what we're discussing now. We're discussing American debt and Eastern's race. It's something that no one here has any control whatsoever. And we are discussing that for half an hour. And where did you get? Did you make any money in this half an hour? Probably not.
No.
Right now, incredible wealth is being created in American stock market. It's like never been before. And you can make really great money. And I can verify that as one of the active participants in that. This is important. That's where you can make money. This is what you should discuss. Instead, you're going American debt, $31 trillion, unfunded liabilities. What else is new? You can talk about it you already talked about it for the last 5 years. You can go on and talk about it for yet another 20 years. What is the result? Anybody makes money out of it.
Sasha,
No.
that's a
Sasha,
great
that's the
point,
topic
Sasha.
of the show.
And people who make money today, are people making money today? Yes. People who are writing covered calls on SPY are making money today. Yeah.
Yeah, but see,
but this is the topic of the show. I just want to say, Mark, to if I heard you correctly, I didn't hear David M. Walker say this, but the idea that there would be a constitutional limit on how much an individual citizen can rack up in credit card debt would be very concerning to me.
Go ahead. Go watch the tape. If you like to tell me, go watch the tape because he literally did say that as he was driving the car.
That's fine. I'm not questioning you. I'm just saying if he said that, it's very concerning to me, that proposition. Obviously, I'm not American, but I can certainly say to you, I've got $700,000 available to me on my credit cards, and I spend it most months. And my American Express card, I spend about $300,000 to $350,000 a month. The reason I do that is because I part own a civil construction and earth moving company. And so when we get a job, we might have $300,000 in concrete expenses, but we might make $320,000 on that job, and we're paid in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. So our ability to access credit and throw that on my American Express card or throw that on one of my MasterCards or Visa cards is very useful to the functioning of the business. So if there was a constitutional limit, because I don't earn that amount of money each month, I don't earn anywhere near that. But as a lot of people in a lot of industries will tell you, their expenses in buying the product that they sell, the expenses of that product are really high. You might only be making 5 or 10 or 15% on top of the amount that you're buying. So the idea that a constitutional limit would come in and say, well, look, you can't borrow or spend on your credit cards more than a certain amount of money, right? And we're going to put that as a blanket rule across the board to try to protect one part of society, that's going to hurt another part of society. And this is the problem with these top-down approaches with government. Nothing is for nothing. We talked before about, when Kimberly asked, well, who benefits from a rise in the interest rate and a downgrade in the credit score of the United States? Well, there are people that benefit, and they're not nefarious people. They're people on fixed incomes, for example, that actually benefit from this. So, what do you do? There's no such thing as something for nothing. Everybody who is involved in the markets understands that somebody is going to wear a cost and somebody else is going to get a gain. The question is, how do we do that in the fairest, most open and transparent way possible?
No, I agree with you on that. And along the same lines, I'd love to hear from what Lance thoughts, because he mentioned, or maybe it was Sasha, that the credit card is a fairly new phenomenon. And I would agree with you, but that notion of credit and credit for something is not that new. Because if you remember after the total era of the depression and everything, there was a thing called sharecropping. And some people would say that was a form of credit conversations that were going on during that time. It might not have been a credit card, but you were getting something for credit based on what you provided.
Well, I would argue the opposite of that, Mark. I think predating credit cards, people went to retail stores or people went to, a small country town. You'd go to the baker, you'd get some bread. You didn't have enough money to buy the bread. You go to the butcher, you didn't have enough money to buy the meat that week. You would charge it. You'd go and pay your accounts at the end of the month. This was a very common thing that happened pre-credit cards. Very common 200, 300, 400 years ago for people to enter into similar arrangements. I'll buy the things right now. I'll pay it back to you later when I'm a wheat farmer. I need to buy some meat right now to feed my family, but I will give you the commensurate amount of wheat to make up for it at a later point. This is actually a fairly common thing. All the banks have done is streamlined it.
And then that's kind of the concept of sharecropping back in the day.
Well, let's go to Milan because Milan's trying to.
Well, credit cards are reasonably new. Borrowing has been around since time began, and borrowing to invest in an appreciating asset can work. Almost all companies issue bonds. They are borrowing to buy a depreciating asset. Like almost all automobiles on the road today are bought using borrowed money, and they're a depreciating asset, and people are losing money that way. So borrowing to buy an automobile doesn't work, but borrowing to buy something that's appreciating at a rate greater than the cost of borrowing makes a lot of sense. So,
but Milan, does it make any sense for the U.S. government to borrow 32 trillion and pay more interest than the entire economy of Australia. How do we benefit from that?
Not quite, almost as much.
I know.
You're getting there.
I knew you
You're
watched the
working on
numbers.
it.
It's not quite. But hey, Shaquille,
Yeah,
like he said, 1.5 trillion. That's a lot of money, just interest on the debt that the U.S. government we're going to pay. And the problem I have, I just want to address Sasha just a moment. The problem I have, Sasha, is this hurts all the American public. And what do we talk about? Barbie movie. We talk about Taylor Swift making billions. We talk about the NFL here in the United States. We talk about everything except the fact we're going broke. And we don't talk about that.
Here's my answer to that. Here's my answer to that. When you're discussing Taylor Swift or so on, there are some practical issues because you may suggest the best place to buy tickets on her concert. You can discuss whether to go on her concerts or not at all. So there are some practical implications. You may discuss what's the best place to park your car when you're going to Taylor Swift concerts. So there are some practicalities involved. The U.S. debt, the unfounded liabilities, and all that. There are no practical issues. There is nothing you can do about it. You can talk about it for 10 years, for 35 years, for 78 years. It doesn't matter. You cannot do a thing about it. It's the same thing like sun is rising every single day. Oh, let's discuss. Is sun rising? Yes. Oh, I don't think so. I didn't see the sun rise. Oh, it's rising 100%. It's going to rise. Now, can you make any money off sun rising? No, because only 9:30 the market opens and you can start doing something.
Again, Sasha, the topic of today's conversation is the US debt. That's why we're discussing it. I'm just going to come back to a couple of things. So, Milan, you talked about a depreciating asset. And people that read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and other books like that will say there's good debt and bad debt, and the bad debt is often having a motor vehicle, for example, which is a depreciating asset. Whilst I understand the sentiment, I will say that in my particular case and in many other people's cases, why would you want to go and buy the car and tie up that money instead of buying a debt or getting a debt over the car and putting that money into the markets where you're going to get a higher return than the interest you're going to pay on the loan? So it depends on what you need. It depends on the functionality of the item that you're purchasing. It's not just about the depreciation of the vehicle. It's also what you're doing with the vehicle. Perhaps that vehicle is helping you to make a living somewhere else. I think that's the important point. But to Nick's point, no, the US shouldn't be. The US government shouldn't be doing that because the US government is not investing like Singapore did. Singapore, there was at the time in Australia, we had one telecommunications company. A second company started up that was owned by a Canadian company. The Singaporeans said, you know what? We're going to buy that. And Singapore did. And so the revenues from that second largest telecommunications company in Australia go to the Singaporean government, and they have made investments all over the world. Singaporean residents are doing quite well out of their government's investments all over the world. The US government hasn't done that. And you'll be quite unhappy to know that my friends' 11-year-old daughters have been ringing me off the hook, asking me to get them Taylor Swift tickets before they went on sale. And I have done so at the cost of $5,000. I was asked if I'd like to go and see it. No, thanks. But I've got the tickets.
A couple of issues here, Shaquille. Singapore. First of all, let me mention that empires have 100% failure rate. Historically, empires have 100% failure rate, and someday the American empire will fail, although I don't see that happening around the corner anytime, but someday it certainly will happen based on the fact that empires have 100% failure rate. Now, Singapore, Singapore location is someplace where ships need to stop to refuel and to get their supplies on there. So their location is so ideal, is the equivalent of having oil without having oil. They have a monopoly the location of Singapore. And that's part of the reason why they're doing so well, in addition to the fact that they have a benevolent dictator that runs the country really well. So if I weren't living in Canada, I might consider Singapore. Australia.
Well, the lifestyle in Singapore is not all it's cracked up to be. But look, what does Singapore really have? They've got a great harbour. It's a barren rock in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, they're in a strategically good location. So is Indonesia. The fact of the matter is that government, however it was structured, we may not necessarily 100% agree with how it's structured, but however their government was structured, the government got out of the way and said, come on in, do what you want to do. Have a look at a place like Hong Kong. What's good about Hong Kong? Nothing. Barren rock in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
About the only positive thing you can say about Hong Kong is it's got a great harbour. And that's what they've used. They sort of hung a sign on the door and said, come on in, the government will get out of the way, and they've had an enormous amount of success. And you could really say the same thing with Dubai. Dubai doesn't have the harbour, but what Dubai did, middle of nowhere, go and look at pictures of Dubai 30 years ago. Desert, absolutely nothing in Dubai 30 years ago. If anybody told you 30 years ago that Dubai would be what it is today, you'd laugh at them. You'd say that's crazy. And all that Dubai did was say, you know what? They had an oasis at the time that was full of water, and they hung a sign on the door, so to speak, and said, come on in. If you want to build it, if you need regulations changed, or if you need something, tell us what you need. We'll sort it out for you. Come on in, bring your talent. You know, Americans like to say, look, and send us your poor, send us your sick, etc., etc. Now what America says is, we don't want you if you're wealthy. We don't want you if you're educated. We only want you if you're hopeless and you can't do anything. That's what we want, right? Whereas the rest of the world says, if you've got something to offer us, please come on in. And look at how successful Dubai is. And other parts of the world like Dubai, Hong Kong, and Singapore have proportionally, versus us in the West, have had enormous economic growth, while our countries have missed out on that growth because of an overburdensome government and overburdensome government debt.
Hey, Shaquille, stop talking about your country, because you're a barren rock in the middle of nowhere as well, because Australia could be called that as well. So I had to just give you a hard time since you were describing those.
Well, no, you can't, because we are a mineral exporting country, and we also have a very strong agricultural export industry. New Zealand is the same, whereas Singapore does not have that to any great degree. Hong Kong does not have that to any great degree, and other than oil, the UAE does not have that to any great degree.
No, I definitely agree with you. I'm just giving you a teasing time and all of that way, just giving you a hard time since I was going like, wait a minute.
But it was a fail, Mark, nowhere as well. So I'm just it was a nice try. It was a nice try, but it was a fail. That's like me saying the weather in North Carolina is good.
Yeah, the weather in North Carolina can be great. It can be very wonderful. And by the way, I did see that a major Australian company, which I did not realize had bought a company that we use regularly, and now they've been bought out. And maybe folks will now be looking at them since they are a publicly listed cloud communication company. But I didn't realize until recently that Hopin, which is the people that bought StreamYard, was an Australian company. And now I found out when I was on a Zoom call, because I was going to talk to some people that might be using Hopin, that Ring Central has bought them. So it is now a Ring Central company, this particular platform that we use, because they got bought. Who's the
Australian company? I have no idea who you're talking about.
Hopin is an Australian company.
How do you spell that?
Hopin. Hopin.
Shaquille doesn't know.
Johnny Beaufort. And when I looked him up, they said it was an Australian
doesn't own them yet.
Hopin is a proprietary video teleconferencing online conference hosting platform, and as of September 2021, the company is valued at about $8 billion.
Really? Wow.
It is a fully remote company without having any office address. That's right, because here in Australia, we don't have addresses.
We don't need addresses.
To deliver our mail.
I've
never heard of this company.
Well, that's who bought StreamYard, but now Ring Central has bought it, and I think Ring Central might be a American or U.S. company along those lines. But one thing that I was going to get to Sasha's point, and it's a very valid point and everything with the sense of the topic and all along those lines, is that we're talking about the debt ceiling, and there are people literally, whether they're in North Carolina, whether they're in California, where I know Shaquille has visited, or whether they're in South Dakota, which I have never visited, but I did know some people from that area and everything, that are trying to figure out how they can pay for their gas, trying to figure out how they can get bread, trying to figure out a number of other things that are going on. So to your point, Nick, they're really going like, I could really care less about the debt downgrade, because I'm trying to figure out how I can get whatever their necessities are. What is your answer to them? Because they're probably going like, I'm trying to get, I can't even.
Well, they better start paying attention, because the cost of living pressures that they're under, and the lack of government expenditure on the middle class and poorer people, but that poorer people don't matter to the government, only middle class does. the lack of expenditure is going to get worse because of an increase in government expenses in relation to the debt. And as to your point about people struggling in the United States, yeah, look, people are struggling in the United States, but I don't see that changing anytime soon, because the whole hard reality is someone like Milan, whose parents immigrated to over there, and worked their whole lives to try to create something, looks for financial independence. Someone like him and his family will say, what do we need to do so that we are financially set up and we're okay? Most people aren't doing that. Most people are not looking at it and saying, if I don't go out to the bar this weekend and I put that $100 away in a savings account, then in 40 years' time, that will have added to my retirement income. People don't look at that if they're born in wealthy Western countries.
Interesting you mentioned that, Shaquille. There was a survey done recently, published quite recently, asking people what they would do if they had to do it over again. That is, what would you say to 14-year-old you? And universally, the fact that most agree on is they would have started saving earlier. The amount that we save depends on three factors. One is, the amount that we get at the end, it depends on three factors. One is the amount that we save. Two is the interest rate at which we save it at. And three is the length of time that we have working for us. And the last one, all things being equal, the last one, length of time, is the most important. And so this survey showed the vast majority of people, if they had to do it over again, would have started saving earlier in life. Everybody would be better off in that.
Look, I think that's absolutely correct. And I think that the advice given by especially older people to younger people is save early. But what happens when you're an immigrant or a child of an immigrant is that gets instilled in you, right? Whereas when you're born in the West, what you're looking at when you're going through high school is you're looking at your friends in year 10 or 11 or whatever year you're in and going, well, they've just bought their first car. I want a first car. They've just gone and bought the new Nikes or Reeboks, or I don't know, whatever the fashionable shoes are. I want that.
Yeah.
And you can't blame young people for wanting that because they want to fit in with their peer group. They're looking at it and saying, well, okay, I can save the money and I'm going to be really financially better off when I'm 50 or 60 or 70. But I remember what I was like when I was 15. 25 seemed like a really old age. The reason that I didn't join the Australian Air Force and become a pilot, which is what I'd always wanted to do, was because they told me when I was 17 that I would have a 15-year return to service obligation. And I went, that means I'm not going to get out of the Air Force until I'm 32. I'll be an old man at 32. 32 is so old. Now I look back, and I'm glad I didn't do it because I've been really successful otherwise. But now I look back and go, God, I wish I was 32 again. So I don't blame the kids in the West. Of course they're going to do that, but what they're not being ever taught is how to balance their life so they can enjoy what they want to enjoy today, but also have something put away, something working for them in retirement. And that's a very difficult thing to get right. And I think, look, when you look at the statistics, immigrants to the United States and immigrants to any country, any new world country around the world, they tend to do, and their children tend to do, much better than the population that was born there. However, that changes after about generation 3 or generation 4. All of a sudden, it all falls apart.
Hey, Shaquille, I've actually got to teach you about something, and I'm going to teach you once again and everything, because, there is a mythology that goes on that all rich people know each other and that they all hang out in this rich people club and all along those lines. And I just mentioned Hoppin, and by the way, he is a transplant, so he actually lives in Spain as of 2021 and everything. But the founder is some guy named Johnny Beaufort, and he's Australian. So aren't you supposed to know him? Because like I said, y'all are both Australian, and there is this mythology that goes on that all rich people in a country, even as vast as Australia, all know each other. So he's got like a $3 billion fortune. You've got some, whatever your fortune is and everything. So, some of the people in the U.S.
They all know each other.
Traveling in the same circles.
Like Sasha can attest that when we met in Toronto, it was at the airport hotel. So, my net worth and a billionaire's net worth are nowhere in the same equation. Look, I'm doing okay in life. I'm probably doing a little bit better than everybody else. I'm nowhere near as wealthy as perhaps you guys think I am or make me out to be. But look, I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunities that I've had in life, and I'm very grateful to my mother and my grandmother who just passed for the sacrifices they made during their lives. My grandmother made a lot of sacrifices in her life that enabled my mother to have the life that she had. And then I was able to expand on that, being born in Australia and being born a British citizen. So, I think
Wait a minute.
I think when it comes to being well liked and well known amongst a very small, wealthy circle of people, I'm not sure that I'd be particularly well liked, because I call them out. Because most people who get rich today get rich because they call in political favor. I don't do that, and that's probably why I don't get invited to the Bilderberg group, or to the Council of Foreign Relations, or I haven't even had the Freemasons come up and say, we take a good man and make him better, come and join us. I've been invited into no secret societies. I've learned no secret handshakes. I'm just out here on my own.
You're out there your own. But hey, Nick, do you think we can get in touch with Roberto? Because I think Roberto, if I remember correctly, is in Spain. So maybe he knows this. Both are hot characters, and he might change it, maybe hanging out in some of those circles. Even though he's a lawyer and everything. But I do remember Roberto used to pop in. And
Roberto's in
Italy.
He's in Italy. He's not in Spain. But
there was somebody we had from Spain.
They're neighbors, and they all know each other. But the reason why, again, the debt is so important, and the media is not doing it, so I'm going to beat up Sasha for a while, is that it does affect everybody. And to say, throw up your hand and say, there's nothing we can do. Wait a minute. It was Congress who did something, and we all get to vote for Congress. And so the thing is, the importance of it is the American public needs to be educated. The reason why your person isn't doing very well in North Dakota, and the reason why is because a lot of the money is being squandered away on interest on a national debt and government expenditures on worthless projects. And so you're living worse.
What delusional world are you living in?
What do you mean?
The education system, if you go and ask a 15-year-old, and I've got a niece who's about that age, who, while she doesn't agree, can tell me at length about gender non-binary and how gender is fungible and you can change depending on how you feel and this and that. But when I ask her to show me how to do long division, she wouldn't have a clue. And you think that the everyday American is going to be educated on the political world and the debt levels of the country? Are you kidding me? If I say to Sasha Starr, I really like the King's Gambit, he's going to say, well, it's an aggressive move. It's an aggressive opening. Sounds good. You're going to beat most people. You're not going to beat me, but you're going to beat most people. That's what Sasha will say to me. If I go to a 15-year-old and say, I really like the King's Gambit, they're going to say, oh, what, King Charles? They're not going to have a clue what I'm talking about. You expect them to understand debt to GPD levels?
Yes. Well, see, that's the problem, Shaquille, is what you're just saying. The American media will push Taylor Swift. They're going to push Beyonce. They're going to push the U.S. women's soccer team.
Because that's what sells, Nick. That's what sells. You want to talk about the debt?
Yeah,
it doesn't sell.
Then they run around, they're broke, and they don't know why. Okay, so the thing is, the American media needs to change. We don't give a rat's rear what you're selling. As the lawyer said on The Lincoln Lawyer, which, by the way, if you haven't seen that on Netflix, it's a great show. Lincoln Lawyer goes, it doesn't matter what you think. What matters what they think is the important thing. So in my humble opinion, Sasha, it doesn't matter what they're being sold. It matters what we are selling. And the thing is, if they don't want to listen to it, that's okay. But then I don't want to listen to them complain.
I think we have come up with the answer.
Yeah.
Sasha, I think we can solve America's problems. We know the agents for Taylor Swift. We know the agents for the Kardashians. What we'll do is get them to sing a song about the US debt level, right? Kim Kardashian can put a bum out over the debt clock, I reckon we can get somewhere. I reckon we can maybe get some publicity. Milan, what do you think?
Shaquille, it's interesting you had said that, because as you were talking and before you were talking, I was actually just thinking, to Sasha's point, of something that is very popular. And I am a fan of crime dramas and those things like CSI Miami, NCIS, and a number of those other ones, even Bones. So maybe we'll create an episode where the debt clock is the thesis of the whole show, and then it will get the same kind of things that you're talking about with Taylor and them, all along those lines. So you may be onto something.
You could do it. You could get Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, all those guys together, and like when you've got a ticking bomb and they've got that clock, and it's ticking down until the whole like world explodes with the bomb, and they've got to try and save it. Maybe you could do that with the US debt clock. Unfortunately, what you have is the people chasing that bomb being Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, these sorts of people. And I don't think they make for a great show somehow.
Hey, Mark, I got an idea. All those people that had Black Lives Matter, they should get them to have a sign, U.S. debt matters. And this way, people will be a little bit more in tune to the fact.
We have a store. Nicholas, right now, but there is a store on
Mark already
TV
said
Chatter,
before.
and we can sell a T-shirt that says "U.S. debt matters."
Nicholas, Mark already said before. It's not just the U.S. debt; it's also about household debt. Okay, so let's be fair about this. All debt matters.
All debt matters. Wait a minute. We're going to argue about that. Not all debt matters. U.S.
There's good debt and there's bad debt. We haven't discussed corruption, which is something that's worth looking at. For instance, the first countries to found OPEC were Venezuela and Iran. In the Venezuela, there's some small number of very, very rich people. Most are poor. Now, in Norway, which has an equal amount of oil, every Norwegian is a millionaire.
Actually, Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia. But when you talk about corruption,
yeah, exactly.
One of the real problems is the woke people that Shaquille backs decided that they're going to take over the oil industry. So they actually did. They took over the oil industry.
They took over everything.
Ran the oil industry. There was only one problem. They hired all the political hacks to run it. But the political hacks had no clue how to run an oil refinery.
The thing is, they took over
the oil industry.
But they took over everything, and
you can imagine. Go on.
They took over everything, and something that I just find so astonishing. We were looking at a mine. I won't tell you what we were mining, but we were looking at a mine in Indonesia, probably about 10, 15 years ago. And when I was having the conversation with the guys in relation to this mine, they were telling me what the tax system was. And they said to me, it's going to be 50%. And I said, 50%? That's ridiculous. That's outrageous. I'm not giving up 50% as a company. And then I've got to pay out the dividends to my investors. That's awful. But by the end of it, they actually had me won over. And I thought, you know what? 50% sounds perfectly reasonable. So leave Venezuela aside for a moment. Have a look at Norway. What does Norway do? Norway says, the same as Indonesia says, you recover your investment. We'll let you recover your investment. Once you've recovered your investment, this is common resources. It's common wealth. You're going to split it with us. We want half of your profits. And in Norway, what they say is, in relation to exploiting the natural resources of Norway, not only do we want half the profits, but we want half the profits off the top. Then, what's left over, you have to pay corporate tax on, the same as any other corporation will. So we want half, because half belongs to us anyway. You've already got your money back. You found the asset. You've got all your money back. We want half of the production, and on the profits you're making as a company, you have to pay taxes like any other corporation would do. You know what? I support that. Everyone thinks that I'm some sort of, anti-tax maniac. I'm not anti-tax, but tax has to be reasonable. When it comes to exploiting natural resources, absolutely you should do that. Canada should do that. Australia should do that, right? What you need to do is reduce the burden on everyday people and reduce the burden on small companies. When you do that, you have a much more free society. You have a much more simplified taxation system, And what you do is you get to put trust fund baby Nick out of business at the National
Right
Pension.
on.
You must have been
and everything.
really
Along those
deep
same
drugs.
lines, there is a
But
very
What I
liberal
like,
country.
Nick, is the
There's a
idea
very
of we
liberal
have
country
less
that's out there.
lawyers, less accountants,
We're
less
gonna
tax
have to- we're gonna have
advisors.
to-
Hold on a second. There's a very liberal
Hey,
country
we're
that
gonna
is
have to
out there,
edit this part
and I
out.
think that
We
they
have to
actually
go.
tax people and everything. But I just want to know if I'm correct about that, Shaquille, because when I think of very liberal countries, of course, Denmark comes to mind because they allow certain things into their society and they are
Like what?
free to buy. Isn't Denmark one of the countries that is open society and the drugs and sex and everything else
No,
are very much
Denmark
viable?
women's team lost to Australia just a
Okay,
few
we're
hours.
going to have to edit this
But
part out
Mark,
because
Mark, that's
you guys are
that's not
becoming
about
too
that's not
liberal.
about liberal the way that you guys in America have taken over the term. That just means that you believe in freedom, like
Okay.
I do. The
No, I
problem
believe in
is
freedom.
that
I'm just asking, do they have
Democrats,
syntaxes?
you Democrats want to use government to take away freedoms, and the Republicans also want to use government to take away freedoms.
Well,
All I want is leave us alone. Let us live our lives.
And I just want to know if they have
tax. With
syntaxes.
that,
but you can
we're
ask
going
me
to
that.
have to go. We got another show coming up. We want to thank our special guest, the Honorable David M. Walker, and all the people from around the world who participated. And we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Bye-bye.